Hello you awesome YouTubers, welcome to my channel, Tiger Rose Rides. Today you find me sat on my bum in my lovely comfy armchair using this voiceover because I've been quite busy this week and it's left me very little time to do some mileage for this week's vlog. The one time I could get out was a nice afternoon. I got home only to have crackling all over the soundtrack despite having a new mic. A real shame, so if any of you have had this problem and you can tell me how to solve it, I'll be very grateful. So this is going to be my last vlog of 2024. I really need to concentrate on getting sorted for Christmas. I love doing these videos, but as you can imagine, researching two histories, writing, editing and recording the narration, making, editing and re-editing the video takes a lot of my time. So I'm going to take time for family over the next couple of weeks and we'll return in the new year. This week for the local history, I'm doing the first part of the History of Gosport. There's far too much of it to do in just one video, and I'm also the bike history, albeit a short one, is on Douglas motorcycles. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. This week's local history is all about Gosport. Gosport, as I probably already told you, is my hometown. My mum moved over here when I was 6 months old, and apart from my time in the army, I've been here ever since. So, enjoy. Gosport was founded early in the 13th century. The name Gosport is probably a corruption of Gooseport, perhaps because wild geese gathered in the area and the old sports field of HMS Sultan, and still do every year. Also, some believe the name comes from God's Port, hence the town's motto, God's Port, our haven. Back in the Middle Ages, Gosport was only a small market town and a small affair of a port. With only a few hundred inhabitants, the main trade was fish and many of the men were fishermen. In the 15th century, a tower called a blockhouse, similar to the picture, was built on the current site of Fort Blockhouse to defend the entrance of the harbour. In roughly 1642, civil war broke out and Gosport supported Parliament, while Portsmouth supported the King. Parliamentary soldiers laid siege to Portsmouth. They set up guns at Portsmouth, roughly where the bus station is today, behind a protective screen of logs, and bombarded Portsmouth, which soon surrendered. However, Gosport was sacked in the year 1645 by the King's army, but it soon recovered. In the late 17th century and into the 18th century, Portsmouth grew rapidly. The Navy created a huge demand for beer, meat, bread and other goods. Tradesmen in Gosport saw they could capitalise on Portsmouth's good fortunes, so stepped up to the mark and grew along with Portsmouth. Gosport's other industries at the time were timber yards and rope walks, where a booming trade of rope making took place. In the early 18th century, a brewery and storehouse for the Navy were built. There was also an iron industry in Gosport in the 18th century, supplying artefacts for the dockyard. In 1677, King Charles II decided that Gosport should be fortified. An earth rampart was erected around the town with a dry moat outside it. About 1680, the King also built a fort on Burrow Island, which was demolished in the early 19th century. Another fort was built roughly where the Falkland Gardens are today, and in 1782 it was sold and turned into a pub. Meanwhile, in 1693, a rich inhabitant of Gosport built some almshouses in Beaminster Lane off Middle Street, which is now the High Street, for old people. Gosport became part of the parish of Alverstoke until 1696, when the Church of the Holy Trinity was consecrated. In the 18th century, Gosport had three main streets: North Street, Middle Street, which became the High Street, and South Street, with minor streets running across them. In Middle Street stood the Market House. This building was on stilts, and the council met in the building, and the market was held underneath. A cobbled slipway called the Hard jutted into the sea where the Falkland Gardens are today. In 1725, a workhouse was built in South Street where the destitute lived, And in 1801, a new workhouse was built in Alverstoke. Workhouse Lake is named after it. Until 1768, the gunpowder store was situated in a tower in the old Portsmouth. It was then moved to a new location near Priddishard Fort, and later gunpowder was manufactured there as well as cannonballs, and a cooperage to make the barrels for the storing of powder. In 1763, a body of men called the Improvement Commissions was formed in Gosport. They had the power to pave the streets and remove nuisances, such as obstructions and dangerous overhanging shop signs. In 1713, Fortune, otherwise known as Forton Hospital, was opened, but it was only used as a hospital for a short time. From the 1720s, it was used to house French and later American prisoners of war from the Napoleonic War. There were also prisoners held in hulks on Fulton Creek or the harbour. If they died, they were buried on Burrow Island, and it is well known as Rat Island. The Royal Haslar Hospital opened in 1753 as a hospital for sick or injured sailors, and famously many of the Victory's wounded from the Battle of Trafalgar were treated and, if they died, buried there. Fort Monkton was built around 1785, and a bridge was built across Haslar Lake, but in 1795 it was deemed unsafe and was demolished in 1801, and the people went back to using boats to ferry people to the hospital. In 1807, Forton Barracks were built on the site of Fortune Hospital, which today is the site of St Vincent's Sixthbourne College. In 1848, it was given to the Marines. A new barracks, were now known as St George's Barracks, were built in 1859 north and south of Mumby Road. In 1842, a pier was built at Stokes Bay for the convenience of Queen Victoria when she travelled to Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. In the 1850s, a ring of forts known as the Palmerston Forts was built from Portsdown Hill to Fareham and then into Gosport in case the French landed somewhere along the coast of southern England and tried to attack Portsmouth overland. Two forts, Gilkicker and Elson, were built in 1858. Fort Gomer, which is now demolished, and Forts Rowner, Brockhurst and Grange were built in 1862. Fort Blockhouse was rebuilt in the 1850s. Gunboat sheds were built by the Blockhouse. Gosport is also affectionately known as Turktown by Gosportiers and is used as a ribbon by Pompey-Geezers, which seems to have got all its origins in an incident dating to 1850 when two Turkish ships seeking shelter in Portsmouth Harbour during a courtesy visit were refused permission to land sailors at Portsmouth. Instead, Gosport gave them a warm welcome and shelter, leading to those living in Portsmouth referring to the neighbours as Turktown. However, 7 of the Turkish sailors contracted TB and died. They were buried at the Holy Trinity graveyard, and the graves to this day are maintained by Gosport's Turkish community and remain in pristine condition. In 1855, the town was described as a well-built, handsome town, but appears to most advantage in the approach by water, as its finest buildings line the coast. By 1851, the population of Gosport had surpassed 16,000, but over 7,000 of them still lived inside the walls. Nevertheless, by the 1850s, the settlement of Forton was growing. Camden Town, the area between Anshill and Brockhurst, grew up in the 1860s and was named after an area of the same name in London. In the late 19th century, Alverstoke became completely built up and the fields separating it from Gosport disappeared. Gosport Park was laid out in 1891 on the site of Ower Common. Around the same time, Walpole Park was laid out on the piece of land called the Horsefield, and it was named after Thomas Walpole, the rector of St Mary's Church, Alverstoke. In 1894, the main gate was demolished with parts of the ramparts. Between 1848 and 1849, Gosport suffered an epidemic of cholera, and 126 people died. The grand sum of £200 was spent clearing away filth and garbage from the streets but no attempt was made to provide proper drains or sewers. At the time, the only drains were gutters at the side of roads. And at that savoury point, I'll leave the Gosport history for now and finish it on my next video. So stay tuned for this week's bike history, which is on Douglas motorcycles. Briefly, Douglas was a British motorcycle manufacturer from 1907 to 1957. Based in Kingswood, Bristol, it was owned by the Douglas family and especially known for its horizontally opposed twin-cylinder engine bikes and as manufacturers of speedway machines, and the company also built a range of cars between 1913 and 1922. The brothers William and Edwin Douglas founded the Douglas Engineering Company in Bristol in 1882. Initially doing blacksmith work, they progressed to foundry work, and Joseph F. Barter's Light Motors Limited was one of Douglas's customers. Barter built a single-cylinder bicycle engine between 1902 and 1904. He then developed the Fee bicycle engine system. The Fee's 200cc flat twin engine was mounted in line with the frame using chain drive with a clutch to a countershaft beneath. This then used a drive belt to power the cycle's rear wheel. Barter founded Light Motors Limited to build the Fee system, and production began in 1905. The Fee's name was anglicised or made to sound more English and was changed to Fairy shortly afterwards. In 1916, the Motorcycle magazine claimed that the 1904 Fee was the earliest flat twin motorcycle engine, of which there had been many copies made since. Douglas made castings for Light Motors and took over the manufacturing rights when Light Motors went out of business in 1907. From 1907, a 350cc Douglas version was on sale, similar to the Fairy, with the engine inline mounted high in the frame, but without the chain-driven countershaft beneath, and with belt final drive. At the 1907 Stanley show, they attracted a lot of attention with a V4 engine motorcycle with automatic inlet valves and a two-speed drive. The V4 was not to go into production, and by the 1908 show it was only the updated inline twin that was on show. Now lighter with the lower engine position, and around 1911 the frame was modified to make the engine still lower, and in 1912 the automatic inlet valves were replaced by mechanically operated valves. During World War I, Douglas was a major motorcycle supplier, making around 70,000 motorcycles for military use. In a 1916 review of flat twin engines in Motorcycle magazine, two models of Douglas engine were listed. The 2.75 horsepower 350cc engine with the valves placed side by side on the side of the engine. The other engine was the 4 horsepower 544cc flat twin. One of the significant differences with this, the larger engine, was that the oil was carried in the sump and supplied by pump to bearings and cylinders. The sump had a glass window to inspect the oil level, and the valves were placed side by side above the cylinders. A third engine was the Williamson flat twin, made by Douglas with cycle cars in mind, but produced for the Williamson Motor Company to use in their motorcycles since 1912. This was an 8 horsepower engine of 964cc, initially water cooled, but from 1913 was also available as air cooled. In the 1920s, Douglas built the first disc brakes and had the royal warrant for the supply of motorcycles to Princes Edward and Henry. Douglas had some success in motorcycle racing and trials events, and 12 Douglas motorcycles were entered in both the Junior TT and the Senior TT, and another 3 were in the sidecar race during the 1923 TT. This gave Douglas their first senior Isle of Man TT victories. However, Douglas had previously won the junior TT in 1912. Tom Sherrod won the 500cc senior TT, and they won the first ever Isle of Man sidecar race with Freddie Dixon, while Jim Wally had the fastest lap in the senior TT with an average speed of just under 60 miles per hour during a wet race. Douglas also placed third in the junior TT that year. Later in 23, Jim Wally won the French Grand Prix, a distance of 288 miles, and another Douglas won the 1923 Durban-Johannesburg Marathon race, a remarkable achievement by Percy Fluke on a 2.75 horsepower machine with an average of 43 miles per hour for 430 miles. 1923 also saw Jim Wally win the Spanish 12-hour race, and Alec Bennett won the 1923 Welsh TT. The late 20s saw success in Austria. Post-war, the factory had little road racing success. However, a Mark III did win an outstanding victory in the 1950 British Motorcycle Racing Club Silverstone Saturday, beating all the Velocets, Nortons and BSA Gold Stars. Douglas motorcycles also became popular in dirt track racing. The 1923 RA model with disc brakes was favoured initially, and this prompted Douglas to build specific dirt track models. These motorcycle designs were gradually increased in size and power with 500cc and 600cc engines. Fitted to the DT5 and DT6 respectively, dirt track models in the late 1920s and early 1930s. The engines had hemispherical heads and a short rigid forged crankshaft. They dominated dirt track racing for about 3 years, and in 1929, the most successful dirt racing ever, 1,200 dirt track motorcycles were sold. The Endeavour, a 494cc shaft-driven model, came out in 1934. This was again a flat twin, but for the first time, Douglas fitted it across the frame instead of in line. Like other companies of the time, they were struggling and attempting to diversify into other modes of transport, and in 1935 they were taken over by Bond Aircraft and Engineering Company. Motorcycle production continued into World War II and was extended to generators. In 1948, not long after the war, Douglas was in difficulty again and was reduced to output of 350cc flat twin models. The first of these three models, designated the T35, was one of their first production models to be fitted with rear suspension swing arm, unique in that the spring-end medium was a longitudinal torsion bar. The 1955 350cc Douglas Dragonfly was the last model produced, and curiously, although a flat twin, it had a chain rear drive rather than an arguably more suitable shaft drive. Finally, the Westinghouse Brake and Signal Company Limited bought Douglas out, and sadly, like so many other motorbike firms of that age, production of Douglas motorcycles ended in 1957. That's it for the motorbike history. It was quite brief compared to most of them that I've done, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. That's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed. I'm not going to be back for a couple of weeks now. I'm going to get Christmas out of the way. I'm going to be very busy over that time. I won't have time to put any videos together. So until my next time I'm here, which will be, I imagine, early January, have a great Christmas and a fabulous New Year, and I'll see you next year.